Hey, everybody, welcome back to The Rebase Show, the show for profession with purpose. I'm your host, Sean P. Martin. And before we dive into today's conversation, which I'm really excited about, I need to remind you, if you haven't already, to join the Profession with Purpose community over on Facebook. And why would you want to do that? Well, because creating more success and more fulfillment in your career doesn't have to be a solo effort. In fact, it really shouldn't be. You're going to get a lot farther and a lot faster whenever you get some of the help that you need, when you can get answers to your questions, when you can hear other people's stories, and when you have that sense of community. So go over to Facebook and search for Profession with Purpose. You'll find the group there and then click to join. And can't wait to see you in there as we continue to grow this supportive community. So with that said, today, we're going to have an amazing conversation, and I'm not even sure exactly where it's going to go. But this gentleman that I'm about to introduce to you, he and I were introduced about a month ago, maybe a little bit more than that. And about 5 minutes into chatting with Mischa, who you're going to hear from here in a minute, I realized, this guy and I are going to get along pretty well. And Mischa Walmsley is a pioneer and a leader in helping some of the world's most well-known companies in solving their toughest hiring challenges. And as a consultant, he's helped companies like Spotify hire great talent through various parts of their organization, particularly focusing in leadership positions. And while Mischa has worked closely with some of the world's most notable companies, what you're going to hear in this conversation are his own personal experiences and his perspectives, and not the position of those actual companies. Just want to make sure I clarify that. Right now, he's currently the associate talent partner at Elements Talent Consultancy and a talent partner at Spotify, as well as a mental health advocate and a qualified mental health first aider. So coming to us live right now, you might listen to it after we record, but coming to us live from London, Mischa Walmsley, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, whenever we first met, our intro conversation, I think, went about a half an hour over what was actually even scheduled for. And we got into topics like cognitive biases that occur in hiring and in leadership positions. We talked about all the great benefits of emotionally safe spaces and some of the not so great things about those. But you have a background in working with helping some really notable companies with their talent acquisition, and particularly in leadership positions. So why don't we start out by you telling us a little bit about your story and like how you ended up in this sort of capacity?
I call it like failing up, right? Falling forward, failing up, fail fast. I don't think you'll find a huge range of people who have moved into like recruitment and talent intentionally. It tends to always be like some sidestep from something else that we were doing. We got distracted and then we landed a job, or one day we just woke up and we were recruiters. Mine's kind of like that. In a previous existence, I was a hiring manager with a no work-life balance at all. And I moved from that into an office-based job in recruitment, and then a hop, step, and a jump into recruiting for tech orgs. And I think one bias I find greatly amusing, because it's definitely in reference to myself, is as an older, in the scheme of the teams I work in, older white male, the bias that's positive bias that's attributed to me is like epic. Like the amount of times I've been in meetings and people are like, oh yeah, Mischa can do that. I was like, I have no idea what you're talking about, right? Like just because I'm like a little bit older and a white dude, your bias is like all through this room, right? I'm like, no. That's like, okay, sure, yeah. So I think I've developed my skill set rapidly in line with just leaning into that bias and accepting it. Like there's points where I've been like, oh, I get the bias, and to rapidly advance my career, I'm just going to welcome in that cognitive bias or that perceived bias, and do whatever I can to make sure other people have a seat at the table as I'm going along, if that makes sense.
Oh, it does. So it's what it sounds like to me, and I share a lot of this perspective as well, is if people are going to give you that benefit of the doubt or that bias that you are, overly capable, one of the moral options there is to, allow that to help you accrue influence, and then put really capable people in place and help other people out, versus just deflecting that that bias about your capabilities, which is another option to say, well, I'm not really the person for that. Maybe this younger, non-white female could help you out with that.
I mean, there's a healthy dose of imposter syndrome sprinkled through my statements there as well, which is always a fun one to experience. But just to realign and recap, I firmly live in a tech recruitment environment. I've now done a fairly decent chunk of the full life cycle. So and aside from anything junior, I've never done any early careers recruitment or junior hire recruitment, which the early career stuff I'm kind of curious about, what would it look like to be able to be in front of quite an intelligent young human who really has no idea about where they're going to go in their career. I think that's that's like a toolkit I'd like to look at building in the coming years. I know I'm going to regret saying that, by the way, for a variety of reasons, but it's all about being well-rounded. So aside from that junior segment, I've worked across a variety of back-end and data engineering, from core engineering, volume tech stack, infrastructure type stuff, through to senior leadership, which is and a healthy dose of product management recruitment as well, which is always a fun place to live. The preferred type of work I like to do, if given a choice, which I rarely am, is anything to do with leadership and developing people. But I do just go where I'm pointed a lot of the time as a consultant. So.
Right. It's interesting. I love that you mentioned product management there, and I don't want to rabbit hole too much on this, but both recruitment and product management are two of those vastly needed skill sets in the market today that there are 0 college degrees on. A friend of mine always joked with me because he read my book on hiring, and he has a lot of the same philosophies. And I was like, yeah, I don't know why they didn't teach this stuff. He said, there's no degree with recruiter in the title. It's just one of those things that, I don't know, either everybody thinks it's easier than it is without realizing that it's harder than it looks. And then product management's another one of those things that nobody's been, playing with action figures as a kid and be like, I'm going to grow up and be a product manager.
Yeah. I do believe I never tracked who it was, but I think somebody last year launched one of the first university courses on the subject matter, and actual core coursework. And I know there's a lot of other short courses floating around. I'm always very cautious around when courses start springing up around a specific thing.
Right.
Yeah. In terms of the talent side of things and the recruitment side of things, it's my CEO at Elements Talent Consultancy, Daniel Goldstein. He has quite a strong aspiration to really elevate talent as a career to a point where it garners more respect in the market, and people could see it as an actual tactical choice in their career arc. And I know people functions like people ops and sort of the more HR side of people things exist in that bubble. But anybody who says recruiting's easy should go and do a bit more of it for a bit longer. I saw a really interesting little snippet of a talk from the previous head of talent at, I want to say LinkedIn, but it's not. Anyway, I'll drag it up and find it. And he was saying there's a point in scaling companies where everyone's got to be a recruiter. If you want to achieve whatever your North Star goal is, you need to flip on a cultural level. You have to flip your mindset to as leadership, as senior leadership, as operational team members, whether you're in engineering or sales. if your small to medium-sized company wants to keep growing, you've all got to think like recruiters, which is be great brand ambassadors and like live your values, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. Yeah. And what it comes down to, I've found, at least working in smaller organizations, sub 500 employees, is the onus on the hiring manager, or at least on the decision makers, for clarity, not just on, okay, what's the position or positions we're hiring, who are we looking for, but like, why do we need to hire these people? Because I saw some statistic a couple of weeks ago around the number of candidates that it takes to make a hire, like on average over like the last year. And like organic applicants, it was obviously a massive amount, like 100. But even internal referrals, like employee referrals, like the number was like 15, 16 candidates before you make a hire on average. And I'm like, that's a problem. Like, you've got your team of, like you said, you got a team of many recruiters, amateur recruiters on your staff. And if you can make it clear to them, this is what we're looking for. Ideally, this is the type of person, like, the personality traits that we're hiring for. We're specifically honed in on this, and this. And here's why we need them, because it's going to make your life easier in these ways. You do that, and people, and if you throw on like an employee or a referral bonus, people will usually jump on it. And every time I'm hiring and somebody says, hey, can I send somebody over for that job? I'm like, yes, please, dear God. Like, if I can have 0 organic applicants sometimes.
Oh, please. Yeah. I mean, I will find a link to this talk that I watched, because there was a moment in it where the chap speaking was talking about overhauling the referral process, because the org he'd gone into just had cash cow written all over it, right? And there was bias all through the process. And personally, and professionally as a recruiter, or as some version of a talent person, I love a good referral, but I wish there were more that weren't just profit motivated.
Right.
I found this jaw dropping. I had somebody approach me and say like, hey, would you refer me into this role? I was like, but I'm a recruiter, right? Like, why? Like, I mean, no, hard no, my friend. Like, hard, you can go through the gamut of like applying, right? And then what do you know? Actually, one subject I find hilarious, which I think is worth. I know there's enough chat on this online, but some people have this concept that the applicant tracking system exists to like block their CV, right? That there's like a robot inside the machine that if they write their CV, or if they pay somebody else to write it in a certain way, that it's going to be optimized for anybody's process. And I'm just going to, even though should be common knowledge, there is no blocker to your CV. You could be a bartender in second year of college and send through your resume to Google's VP of product role. And whilst you will not get anything but a generic response to that, if that anything, it will still go through and be seen by a human eye, right? Optimizing your LinkedIn profile for search words to be found in people's searches, or optimizing your your personal website for SEO, that definitely a thing. And you can do that all day, and you can optimize for whatever Boolean search strings you want to be, if you want to be found. But using that same logic to putting your resume into somebody's application process is insanity. And look after mental health. Don't do that. There's a couple of people out there who write much more eloquently on this subject than I, but also I have a really contentious opinion as somebody who works in talent. Resumes are terrible. And I don't just mean terribly written, but I mean a terrible representation of you as a professional human.
Yes, it's a dating profile.
I'm against them as a rule, and I look forward to the day where I'm not suggesting that your LinkedIn profile will supersede the need for a resume or a CV. We're not in any short order, and I'm definitely not recommending that you make a video resume. I loathe those things. But I look forward to the day when we look back and go, oh, hey, isn't it funny all those years we used those 1-2 page documents to describe who we are as professional beings?
Yes.
I've avoided using one for the last 5 years. I plan on continuing to avoid, and that being said, my LinkedIn is also terrible. Actually terrible. That's kind of intentional as well. But
yeah, well, so I'm going to have to ask, because I think I've got some idea of how you might respond to this, but in lieu of using a resume or a CV, what do you recommend some of the things that people can do? Because I'm kind of in a similar boat. Like I think I've got a resume somewhere, and I'm consider myself a half decent writer, but I always say that the only thing questionably worse than a resume is a job ad. Like they're both equally awful, and no hiring manager's ever read a resume and just been like, oh my God, it's so captivating, I couldn't put it down. Right. And the same is true for anybody reading the job ad for some job they're going to apply for. Nobody's ever like, it was like War and Peace, but in like 700 words. Is amazing. So anyway, I digress. What are the things you recommend for people to do on the job seeker side?
Just go old school, build meaningful relationships with people and understand what it is you're actually looking for. And that's not so crass as to say, like, just be a hard out networker. My advice for people, you need a resume. I'm not saying like we're not there yet, right? you
Right.
need a resume, but make it to the point. It's a door opener. It's a tool. Use it as such and have many different variations on it if your career profile dictates that you need to have different versions of it. If it doesn't, that's a whole other conversation. Connect with me. I give free consults on those, because people have, in my opinion, head the wrong direction. Optimize your LinkedIn profile if you're actually in the market. I think actually the greatest success I've had is just be like really transparent with who you are, what you want, and network in a genuine fashion. What I think that means, or how I try and approach it, is give. Like don't network trying to receive, like going to a network back when we were allowed to meet in person. Yes, I like beer and pizza at insert meetup here. I like beer, I like pizza, and I love hearing people talk about tech problems. So I will go to meetups, but I don't go there to find candidates. I stopped doing that a long time ago. I go to find information and beer, pizza, good chat, and maybe a meaningful connection with somebody on something else. And if I can help out, I will. I also learned really quickly to not say I'm a recruiter at things like that. But I think if you use LinkedIn and any other network, professional or otherwise, like with a good heart and mind, and like use it with intent, try and build meaningful connections and give back to a community. You'll have a much better hit ratio, positive, than you will going around trying to sell people your plots, your schemes, right?
Yeah. Well, and I don't know, I see a resume as at best supporting documentation, right? To those connections or those relationships that you're building. So 100% agree. And I love the way you describe networking as well, because it really is connection building and relationship building. It's not transactional. Right? It's not, well, I talked to this person for 5 minutes. Now I'm going to ask them, is Google hiring? Right? So it's really valuable. What are you seeing nowadays, like different behaviors? Because you kind of get to see both the job seeker side and the employer side. What are some of the things that have shifted for better or worse since COVID hit in job seeker behavior and employer behavior? I'm noticing a lot of people who are currently secure in jobs being a little bit less likely to make a change because of everything going on with COVID. They want the stability and the certainty, even if a company who's trying to recruit them is stable. They're just, they're hesitant to make those changes. What are some of the things you're seeing from the employer side or from the job seeker side that are shifting a little bit as far as behavior goes?
I think that the pandemic accelerated a few existing patterns of behavior that we were bringing into the workplace around flexible and distributed working and remote distributed teams, and also mental health awareness and mental health in the workplace, and also community and connection in the workplace. Those are all very big subjects in and of themselves, and all stuff we can go through one by one in a moment. But so I remember very clearly January last year having a look at some figures for a company it was some figures that were going to be like released based on the historical data and forecasting around churn. And I love looking at stuff I love looking at data, but I also get really like cagey whenever anybody puts forecast or put next to anything, because that is an
crystal ball emoji.
Yeah, exactly. That is an educated guess, my friend. But like, we can make educated guesses based on historic data, right? And churn, organic or otherwise, in the workforce is directly relates to how busy I am, right? And there's factors that you can mitigate and manage. And January was pre-pandemic spike. And so I was like, I'm not a gambling man. I don't gamble on anything. But I was like, if I was a betting man, I would project this figure to be X because of Y, right? And because I knew there was a couple of key like data points that I was aware of, and then 4-6 weeks later, like the world had started to like burn. I was like, so I'm just going to rephase my forecast on that. And what we saw was where organic churn or attrition in the workforce would have been in certain teams would have been X because of Y. Everybody got really conservative, and this was pre-layoffs, right? Pre-redundancies. And then you've got, so that was, it's just, I love watching human behavior, right? Everyone was like, oh, wow, just sort of like taking a deep breath and waiting. So I think we've passed that first wave of the storm in the market. We are heading into some serious recession, but it's not like 2008, right? It's a very different type, and it's hitting manufacturing and a few other sectors in a completely different way. I feel reasonably insulated in tech because distributed workforce, tech stacks, right? So I can only speak for what I know. So last year was interesting. Everything sort of like went quiet for a little while, and I'm not one to be quiet, so I just kept sort of like banging my head against the wall, doing what I was doing, at a much slower pace, and then it just corrected, right?
Yeah.
Then it just sort of like went back to where it was, in terms of like, are people hiring? I really enjoyed seeing humans rally. Like people putting out like the wikis of everybody who, like I remember I have a friend in my network who's a head of people at a startup, and he was like, oh, hey, do you know anyone of like this sort of profile? I think he was looking for some sort of product type person. I was like, no one comes to mind, but have you looked at this list, or this list? Because I know that. And he was like, yeah, been through all of them. And, it was like really nice to see the people and talent community go like, right, people are hurting right now.
Yeah.
How can we help?
Yep.
And I can cite multiple examples of just seeing people like really rally, around. Yeah. There's a quote I have here. It's a really American quote. It's from a TV show. So where they say, look for the helpers.
Okay.
Mr. Rogers, right? That's the guy.
That sounds right. Yeah.
Yeah. Look for the helpers, right?
Yeah.
I'm a firm believer in people being generally quite nice. I mean, like I'm in talent and recruitment because I wanted to change. I wanted to like refocus my energies on having a more work-life balance. But the job makes me happy. I literally like my two main things are like I change lives and I build teams. right? I've been building teams since I was like a kid, and changing, like someone gets a new job, like for the better or worse, it's going to change their life, right? So I love that stuff. In terms of like what I feel has been accelerated, I remember early on when we were all recalibrating to work distributed work from home, the world being steadily catching fire. And everyone's like, oh, how are you finding the video? Like, being on video all the time. I was like, this has been me for the last few years. The only difference is I'm now doing it at home, which I used to do a couple of days a week already, right? So, or like on an ad hoc basis. So I was really lucky in like low friction on that.
Mm-hmm.
Worked in a flexible manner, distributed from my key stakeholders for the most part. I work globally, so one day I might be talking to somebody in Sao Paulo, Mexico, Eastern Europe, Central Europe, Stockholm happens, London, so I've got quite a flexible mindset on that. So I didn't really know that the screen fatigue didn't hit me. What was surprising was the community aspect. It took a while for that to I went through this like bell curve of like, oh, you'll never get me back in the office. Like this is my happy place. Like why? I don't need to commute anymore, even though my commute is really small anyway. And now to the point I was like, oh, it would kind of be nice to like see somebody some of the time. And so now it's just this like actual pendulum swing of like, how am I feeling this week? I think I've started to rest. I had a chat with a friend who works for they're like a big architecture office company. They called Unispace. They do like high-end offices. And we, in between lockdowns, we caught up for a couple of beers, and I was like, hey dude, are you okay? Because your company builds offices. I get the clear indication there's a lot of people are not too bothered about going back to the office. He's like, dude, we're doing better than ever. We're reimagining what we're going to use the office space for. And we had a long discussion about it. And, we had beers, so we had a discussion about it. Now, the way I feel about the office is, yes, I need it. Yes, it's not going anywhere. No, I don't want to live in my apartment and work from here. That was never what I signed up for. Why I would go into the office would be to collaborate and build and perpetuate culture and to build close relationships.
Yeah.
And if you're an actual line manager, I think then there's compounding effects around those three things. So I think how we're going to be looking at, I hope to reimagine how I interact with the workspace. Basically, you feed me and I'll turn up. It's a really easy rule of thumb. So put on lunch or breakfast, lunch or dinner, and I'll be there. But give me a room with whiteboards and colleagues and some snacks and a couple of interesting problems to solve, and I'll come in like once or twice a month. Ask me to commute, to be chained to a desk 9 to 5, and I will quit. I won't even resign. I'll just have to straight up quit. Right?
Yeah, one of the things that I've been hearing a lot is that folks miss is definitely the collaboration, the problem solving, the whiteboarding. But the one thing that it makes sense to miss, but I don't think anybody realized that they were going to miss it, was just those happenstance conversations, just the water cooler talk, hey, let's get up from our desks and walk around the block because we need to get some fresh air, but we do that together and we have a conversation, those things. Yep. It's those sort of kind of organic connections and that relationship building you're talking about, because that's a lot where that comes from, I think, in the workplace. Those aren't happening as much because everybody's like either on a call or they're quote unquote by themselves. And that's a really interesting change in dynamic, but I'm with you. It's, I'm still of the mind, especially as a hiring manager. If somebody's like, no commuting, remote only, I'm like, forever? Like, yeah, I never want to go anywhere. I'm like, what about like twice a year for like a team building thing? Or like, as a wise man once said, only a Sith speaks in absolutes, which is a funny statement in and of itself. If you actually dig into that, but Anybody who absolutely will never commute or will never go into an office or has to be in an office all the time or demands people to be at their desk all the time, like those always give me pause. So I'm with you on that. And I wanted to branch off of that a little bit, but it is interesting to see. And I'm glad to see that I'm not the only person who went through this where you're like, being remote is fine. I kind of miss connection. And then it is literally day to day, hour to hour sometimes.
I literally I sat in like catch ups with colleagues. I was like, I'm never coming back to the office. Like, I was like, what's the point? And so those water cooler chats, like the potential for innovation in those discussions, collaboration, innovation, there's an essence of our culture that exists in those moments. I'll agree on that. But what I don't miss and what I don't want to invite back is the productivity I've gained by not having those moments. But then you go like, now what am I indexing high on? Well, some weeks and months I might index high on productivity, but like, where's my happiness, right? Where's my mental health in the workplace actually sitting? And that is like a rubber band, right?
Yeah. Well, and so many factors and I'm certainly not a mental health expert. There's so many factors that go into that mental health picture, and community and connection is definitely one of the big ones. If nothing else, because people who are working from home all this time, surrounded by their family members, and that's it. I personally live, alone. I have a golden retriever who keeps me company, but even sometimes that can be a little bit much. But that lack of community and connection, or true connection, or however it is you define that for yourself individually, is a big contributor to mental health. What are some of the other things that you're seeing that are coming up in these conversations around mental health in the workplace?
So discussion in like the workplace around wellness, like in an organization's investment in wellness, and like, the anecdotal sort of like joke is like ping pong table, like table tennis tables, bean bags and fruit bowls, right? In terms of or like even gym subsidies, like when we look at like what our benefits are from an employer. I have this firm belief now that as in senior leadership, I don't care what type of org and what sector you are, when you look at your budget macro and you look at wellness, one, if you don't have wellness in your budget, like you're so far behind the curve, you've got much bigger problems. You're probably still thinking about your digital transformation, right? But when you look at those lines in your budget that encapsulate wellness, if you don't currently have one of those lines that's pegged with a number next to it that's attributed to mental health and your fiscal investment in your humans, then you're actually behind the curve in how employers need to look at the workplace and think about and invest in. And like, what's the, and just because times there are changing, and they have changed. Like, I personally, fruit bowl doesn't help me. Like, I can afford fruit.
Yeah.
I can also pay for my own gym. I'm actually not asking for anything. I'm just asking for organizations and leadership to double down on their investment in their people. Otherwise, they'll go.
Yeah.
They might not go straight away, but when they can, they will. And retaining people is a lot cheaper than acquiring them. Period.
Can you repeat that just so that we can get a good sound clip of that last thing that you said? Because I really want businesses and business owners and leaders to hear this.
Retaining people is a lot cheaper than acquiring them.
Yes. Thank you.
But like looking at the investment on that, like,
you're hearing this from a recruiter, folks.
This is like where I just need to pull my hair out. It's like, measure happiness. So things I talk about frequently is like happiness. People like, I've been on calls with senior technical leadership and asked the question, like, do you think that'll make you happy? And they're like, does that sound like a job that would make you happy? Because if you don't think it's good, then don't. And happiness is complex. Happiness could be more money. Fine. If that, it could be a bigger problem. It could be a smaller problem, right? It could be less or more. It doesn't, like, I don't even care what happiness is to you. I need you to know what happiness means to you. Happiness could be moving from the States to Sweden, or to London, or London to the States. You know, I spend a lot of my time talking, more so now, but even for the last few years, I've spent a lot of time talking about people moving around the world, which is a privilege of a dialogue to be engaged in. So yeah, that's probably my highest level thought, is like, at a senior leadership level, let's go top down and bottom up, right? So top down, when you're sitting in your annual conversations about investment for the org, where's mental health in that line? What does investment look like for you as an organization?
Right.
And then from a bottom up, how do we relate to each other in the workplace? Because I mean, like, I think personally, I mean, it's 2021. It is the future, right? We may not have jetpacks. We may not have meals in pill form. But, you know, we kind of do actually have jetpack, and we do kind of have meals in pill form. But, like,
I was going to say, I'm pretty sure Soylent and some of the other stuff we got going on, we're close.
But I think we've come along leaps and bounds in how we communicate and relate to each other. And I don't know, like, be there. Understand that the workplace is no longer, for some people, the workplace is a huge part of their lives. They don't just do 9 to 5 was a construct that we created out of the back of the Industrial Revolution. That's nonsense, right? People want vision and mission oriented organizations. I'm not going to pretend to be terribly well read on that, but I know that's what I align with, what I need, and what I want. People want to be happy. They want to feel supported. They want to work flexibly in terms of hours and output and throughput. And, you know, like, if somebody's an engineer and they want to code from like 10 p.m. until 4 a.m. and they're just one of your best employees, I'd suggest you probably need to have a discussion with them around what being present for the team, being flexible and accepting that the workplace is just a framework filled with humans. As soon as we sort of relate to that, like, it's these buildings and these companies that we inhabit, they're just filled with humans. Be kind, be generous, be relatable. Like, so from the bottom up, being really kind and compassionate and empathetic. And then, like, it gets really murky how we support each other through the middle layers of an organization. Like, how do we support each other, but still, you know, focus on delivery of X, growth of Y? I definitely don't have any magic wand or silver bullet on this. But in terms of, I made a commitment to myself around mental health advocacy a few years ago, to just say how I'm feeling, even if that's uncomfortable for me and the people hearing it. Because I think I spent too much of my adult life not doing that. And I think I now know what good mental health feels like, having had poor mental health previously. And being like, I'm a bit like OTT with work. I love my job, so I'll work. One thing I love about being at home now is I actually remember to eat lunch more often than not. And that's because I'm at home, and my wife will be like, "Yo, it's lunchtime. What's for lunch, fool?" Whereas in the office, I would tend to be like, "Oh wow, what's that sound? That's my blood sugar crashing." Beeline for the fruit bowl, right? Beeline for the banana. Yeah.
It's almost a badge of honor in some places. I know I've worked at places where, especially working at places where lunch was provided, going and grabbing lunch and going back to your desk, because it's just more time, more opportunity to do work, and skipping lunch or working through lunch was almost like this badge of honor. So
no, let's focus on that for a second as well, because talking about the workplace as around community. I mean, I mentioned earlier, if you feed me, I'll be there. I've built some amazingly strong relationships with just key stakeholders that I've worked with over long periods of time on, like, what I consider interesting work. And we would never book meetings because we would invariably bump into each other at breakfast or at lunch. Or I would know where you sit and I will come find you, because if you're blocking me, I will come find you. That's just the kind of guy I am, right? but breakfast, and it wasn't planned breakfast meetings. I would never book. I just sit there and have breakfast. If they come by, we have a chat.
Yeah.
I can afford breakfast. Pay people that they can afford the stuff, but they want to access it.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about being a mental health advocate, qualified mental health first aider. Then, what does that bring to your life that makes you happy, and what does it allow you to do for other folks?
So, the advocacy bit was a conscious choice a few years back to be comfortable being uncomfortable. Like as a male growing up in Australia, I was glaringly aware as a young adult that Australia has one of the highest youth suicide rates in the world. Developed nation, right? First world country. Like the May, I don't know, I haven't looked at the figure in a long time, but when I was growing up, when I was like 15, 16, 17, 18, it was like the highest in the world. And that terrified me because it was like my demographic, right? And so I was like, there's something wrong here. What's going on? That's tied to a lot of key factors that I'm not particularly well educated on, but to say toxic masculinity, racism are two really strong ones there. So coming up around that and having had a bit of a roller coaster through my adult life around mental health and depression and grief and stuff. And, I've been through talking therapy, which went pretty well for me. And now I don't, and I feel good. Changed my relationship with alcohol, changed my relationship with work, changed my relationship with exercise. So once I got to like a happier place, I just decided to invest in myself and just be like, I'm going to say how I'm feeling. I'm going to start conversations with like, my mental health isn't great at the moment. And that's like a clean statement. I was really lucky for a while. I reported into a couple of, I had loads of different dotted line reportings, but two of the people I reported into, our weeklies, were really safe spaces, right? So having a safe space with leadership where I could talk about, because I put a lot of pressure on myself around work. So being able to balance the pressure I create around excellence, delivery, with the potential negative impact it can have on me mentally was a good learning. The mental health first aider piece, I was very lucky. A close friend of mine sits as the chairperson on a board of trustees for a trust in memoriam to a close friend of his who took his own life. It's the Matt Palmer Trust here in London. And it's my understanding, I didn't know Matt, it's my understanding that Matt taking his life was quite a surprise to his network. And the ripples of that are felt to this day. The trust sponsored last year, mid last year, the first group of that was a group of all men to do mental health first aid training, in the hope that even just the small ripple effect of that group of like 10 of us out into our networks around support mechanisms through discussing, being open to discussing, being open to supporting a healthier relationship with and dialogue about mental health. Yeah. In terms of like the cause and effect since then, I think the coursework was good. I actually think my opinion on mental health first aid as a coursework is a few things. I think we should all do it, period. I think as an organization, the investment is tangible. I also don't think it means there's almost like a incorrect correlation between first aid and the efficacy of the course, because yes, you need physical first aiders in the workplace. People are going to hurt themselves. What they're going to do is they're going to get a paper cut or they're going to fall over, right? Like really simple things in terms of physical first aid. And your first aid kits in an office will always need plasters or Band-Aids. That's the only thing you really ever need. Or they're going to call somebody, a medical professional, right? When we look at the mental health first aid, I mean, and just to wind back, I've done a lot of physical first aid over the years. I've done many different courses. One of the last courses I did, somebody put it really well. And it's like, at the end of the few days, was like, the best result you can have out of having done this physical first aid course is never having to use any of these skills, like a broken leg or burns or bleeding, all of those things you learn at a first aid course. I think actually the inverse is kind of true for the mental health first aid course, because it's, for me, I think I'd had a lot of exposure to bits and pieces of it. So it was kind of like just pulling together this collective of knowledge and experience. But for some people, they had no idea, like they've never had any exposure to eating disorders or what the key signals might be in somebody's change in behavior around an eating disorder, or anxiety, stress, depression, how like these challenges can present in our loved ones, our colleagues. And so I think the mental health first aid course is just kind of like healthy subject matter to dig into for everybody. The likelihood of me being in the office when somebody has a need for a mental health first aid is like statistically very unlikely. And also demographic, being like an older white dude, the likelihood of somebody choosing to access me as a support mechanism, also highly unlikely. If we get as many people to go through this coursework and get a baseline for like what good and great mental health can look like, and what the key negative indicators are around certain conditions, but like what can depression look like? It might help us see it in our colleagues. More importantly, build an environment where it's safer to talk about these things.
Yeah.
Like what does mental health look like in a high performing team? Like what does it look like currently? What can it look like? What is, as a leader of people, what does it look like to support your team? I'm not suggesting it means you should go out and that anybody should feel the responsibility to go out and do this course of study. But I think there's very little harm in getting the education.
Yeah. And we'll definitely, I want to get some resources from you on some of this coursework and some of those things, and we can share that in the description for this particular episode. As a leader, and we're about out of time here, so but as a leader of people, and I'm a firm believer, and I've said this multiple times, that everybody has the capacity to, and in some cases, the responsibility to lead somewhere in their life, right? Whether that's in your family or it's in your community or it's your workplace, and it's not always a permanent thing. It's not always a title. But being leaders of one another, what are some ways, you mentioned one earlier, of openly stating my mental health isn't in a great place right now, but what are some other ways that as a leader, you could set an example for other folks that you are aware of mental health concerns ongoing and you want to start that dialogue and that conversation? What are some ways that people can be leaders? It's
about being vocal. It's, it's about, in my opinion, it's about bringing it up, giving the subject matter of mental health a seat at the table. Reverting back to what I was saying about investing from in your budget, time is our resource, right? So creating space and time for it to be a part of our communication, right? Do you have a wellness team? If not, why not? If that wellness team is an ERG, like an employment resource group, make sure the individuals in there are resourced and funded, not doing it as a supplementary. Any ERG, any employee resource group, the individuals in there should be rewarded and should have a cost benefit ratio and analysis to their workload, because they're giving back to the community that is your workplace, right? And I don't know. I have no idea what the figures for mental health in CEOs would be at all. It's not something I've ever thought to look into. But I guarantee humans who exist in senior leadership have felt every range of experience that anybody in junior functional work, bringing humanity into the workplace and communication around that humanity. Yeah, just be kind and generous. Communicate in a heartfelt manner, create the space to open the dialogue and treat it as such. It's not a one-way conversation. Oh, we built an EIG. Oh, there's a wiki page. There's a page on the wiki. It's a dialogue that feeds into itself.
It's not a box you check and you move on. This is a part of our ongoing reality from now and into the future. And to your point, it's an investment that will help you with retention, that will help to reduce churn. There's no guarantees, but from a bottom line standpoint of your company, the less turnover you have, the less you spend on acquisition and all those things. So, no, really wonderful point. This is, again, I mentioned this when we started the show. I had no idea necessarily where this conversation would go. There were some more cheeky and maybe less serious topics we might have gotten into, but I'm really glad that we dove down into this one. And for sure, we're going to have you back on the show because there's so much we could talk about. So where can folks, go ahead.
My closing point on that one is really simple, and it's do the work.
Yeah.
What the work looks like is going to be different for every body and every team and every organization, but do the work. Otherwise, it's a never-ending task, right? But
no quick fix.
Yeah,
love it. Well, Mischa Walmsley, where can people go to connect with you and to learn more? And
jump in. How do the kids say? Slide into my DMs on LinkedIn. I'm definitely not a LinkedIn open networker. That way, madness lies. But I do look through every single connection request and use a rule of thumb whether I think somebody's trying to sell me something or leverage me. But if anybody takes the time to connect with me on LinkedIn and includes a message, a contextual message, 99.9%. I'll take, if anybody actually asks me, this is one thing I love. If anybody asks me for help on LinkedIn, I'll drop what I'm doing. Provided they ask me for something I can help them with.
Yeah.
Like if somebody's like, can you refer me into a back-end engineer role at X? I'm like, heck no, just do the work, apply, right?
Yeah.
The computer is not blocking your application. You're just not qualified, right? But anyone can feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn and we can start a dialogue. I'm into it.
Excellent. Awesome. Well, like I said, I look forward to the next time we get an opportunity to chat as well. Until then, thank you, Mischa, for joining us today. And until next time, folks, for the Rebase Show, this is Sean signing off. Cheers. Hey, it's Sean again. I know you thought that was the end of the episode, but just when you thought you were out, we pulled you back in. Just for a minute, though, with a few final reminders as we wrap up our time today. First, if you haven't already subscribed, what are you waiting for? By subscribing to the show, you'll get access to every amazing conversation and solo episode in the archives. Everything from the future of work, to going into the business of you, to dealing with stress when you're feeling overwhelmed, and you'll automatically get every new episode right when it gets released. And I don't need to tell you how to do this because you're a podcast listener. And you're listening to this show, so you're obviously awesome. Now, if you are enjoying the show, then all I want for Christmas is your 5-star rating and review. And I've made it even easier for you to do so. Just tap the link in the show notes or go to ratethispodcast.com/rebase. Now, every new rating and review makes me feel like the popular girl in school. But more importantly, the podcasts with great reviews are the ones that get featured on podcast platforms. So more people will discover the show and we can continue to grow this movement of profession with purpose. And last but not least, if you enjoyed this episode, and if you're not driving right now or flying a helicopter or performing life or death surgery, then please screenshot the episode and tag me on Instagram at RebaseHQ. Doing just one of these things will absolutely make my day. If you do all three, well, let's just say I'll owe you a huge hug and a high five the next time I see you. I sincerely appreciate each and every one of you who's tuning into the show every week and who's joined the Profession with Purpose movement. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you next time.